All right, so I'm going to read the chart for Russia, and this can be really interesting when you read charts for places like countries or cities or states or what have you, because there's definitely a lot of truth in it. Not just like astrology isn't just useful for people because entities like businesses or governments also have birth dates in a way or start dates, which depending on what they are, sort of characterize the whole themes that they play out and the entity as a whole. And so just before I get into this, it's important to just say that with country birth charts, so to speak, there's always some debate about exactly which date we use. And typically with when we talk about the start date of a country, there's two different sort of aspects of it. One is just when did that country like begin? Like when did that like America would definitely obviously be 1776 because America was declared sovereign on that day. It wasn't its own entity before that. So there wasn't any idea of that being a separate body, if that makes sense. But also, so that's one interpretation. Or older countries like China, we probably don't even have a date for that because it's so many thousands of years old. When did, or maybe there is, I don't know. I haven't looked into it, but I would just speculate that, or like Egypt or something. When did Egypt become known as a thing? As an entity. It was probably so long ago that we don't know a date. But then there's another birth date, if sort of start date, which is more of countries not only they form and they gain their character, but then they usually have several incarnations after that. So, for instance, like France, I think right now it's called the Fifth French Republic or something like that because countries, they switch government systems or they'll have a new constitution or maybe they'll be invaded by a country and be sort of dead for a little while but then be revived later. So most countries have that, or in ancient China they would have different dynasties, so there'd be a different sort of incarnational date for each dynasty. So it's almost like countries are born and they have multiple incarnations, if you will. And this isn't always super clear cut. It could be debatable. But for Russia, so I used two charts. One of them I just looked up, Russia astro theme, and it came up with this chart, which is September 20th, year 862. So this was the first type of chart which I described, where it was where Russia became a thing. Like there was no Russia before that. This was, and again, I didn't super delve into Russian history or anything like that. This isn't the purpose of the video, but I vaguely understand that has something to do with like the Vikings setting up the first sort of Russian government there, or something along those lines. So this is where the idea of Russia and like the soul of Russia became a thing, the identity of it as a sovereign nation, I guess. But of course, Russia has had many incarnations. Russia has had different republics and monarchies and communism, and different constitutions. And so while this is the chart for Russia itself, or Russia as its own sovereign entity, it had also got invaded by the Mongols. But so while that's just for the character of Russia itself, this chart is for the Russian Federation. So after the Soviet Union collapsed, the current form of government which exists now was started on this date, basically. And they did introduce a new constitution 2 years later in 1993. This chart is for December 12th, 1991 in Moscow. They did start a new constitution 2 years later on December 12th, 1993, but I'm just going to use this chart just because this just sort of characterizes this incarnation, I guess. You could look at the constitutional chart and that would tell you about the constitution, but I'm more looking at the character of the country. So that's why I'm looking at the start date of the country, itself as just a character in general in this chart, and the character of the current incarnation of the country as this chart. And I guess if I have to pick one over the other, I'm going to favor mostly this one just because, it just, again, it just characterizes the people of the country, the history, the government, all that can be found in different elements of this chart. All that stuff can be found in this chart, but really only from 1991 onward. So first of all, in this chart, I notice a lot of planets are in detriment or domicile, or they're exalted. So there's a lot of really strong planets and there's a lot of really weak planets. So for instance, yeah, and I mean, there's just a lot of interesting things about this chart. So for instance, you've got Venus in detriment in Scorpio, and it's in the 12th house. Jupiter's in detriment in Gemini. And so right away, I feel like some of these charts you can tell are purposely done during auspicious times astrologically, because certain governments do use astrologers to, start these things at positive times where you get a good chart for these types of things. I don't think that happened here, just because if they had an astrologer help them with this, it was probably a bad one, just because Venus and Jupiter are like your planets of abundance and, wealth, I guess. I mean, if we're talking about a country, it would be your economy and your wealth mostly. But they're the two like easiest, most beneficial planets, the most like gift giving planets, I guess, if you want to put it that way. And they're both in detriment here. So, I mean, right away, you're gonna have struggles with your economy there. I mean, I'm gonna stay mostly objective and just read the chart and not insert my own bias about Russia as a country, but I can also apply it. I can apply my bias a little bit and just say that it makes sense that Russia as a country has struggled with wealth. I think in the world today they're relatively wealthy, like not as much as the Western countries, but more so than, the third world countries, if you want to put it that way. So, I mean, so they're okay, but this just makes me think that if they had maybe had a better birth chart, maybe they would be a lot wealthier as a country. And that kind of reinforces a pattern I saw in this other chart, in the 1991 chart, where Venus is again in detriment in Scorpio, and Jupiter is in detriment this time in Virgo. So it's like, I don't know if that's just an accident or what, but based on these two charts, this country just seems kind of doomed to struggle with economic deficiencies, or with poverty, or like, I hate to say it, but again, if there was a good astrologer there, they'd probably say, maybe we should start the country like a month later or a month sooner or a year different where Jupiter's in a different sign. Like if Jupiter was in Taurus, that would have been so much better, but it was in Gemini, so yeah. But also just more planets in domicile or fall or exaltation. See, I think those are the main ones that are in detriment. Yes. Oh, and the sun is in fall in Libra. So the sun is in a really weak sign. It's not as strong there. I think those are the main ones. And as for the 1991 chart, yeah, that's the main thing, just Venus and Jupiter. But again, those are such positive planets. It's just such a shame that they're both in detriment in both charts. But then this chart does have a lot of strong planets too. So for instance, the sun is in fall, so it's a really weak position, but it's conjunct Saturn, which is exalted in Libra. And the sun and Saturn are right next to the midheaven. Actually, more specifically, the sun is conjunct Saturn not only to the degree, but to the minute, so to the fraction of the degree. You can't get much more conjunct than that. So maybe this chart was done on purpose. It's just a very interesting chart, or a very interesting choice. Because of this configuration, since I'm kind of focusing on that right now, this country does seem like it would be a leader in the world, because you've got the sun exactly conjunct Saturn, so it'd be, again, that's sort of a challenging placement where there'd be a lot of challenges, especially at first. Again, I don't know a lot about Russian history, but I would suspect from this that it would be very tumultuous, and you've got rising at 29 degrees Scorpio, so very tumultuous, a lot of changes and challenges. But especially at first, I would speculate from this that the history would be full of tumultuous times, but especially early on, there'd be a lot of challenges, and there'd be relatively more success later in history. Yeah, but also, so like I said, the country would be a leader, but in a sort of backwards way. This might sound weird since we're talking about Russia, but it almost looks like a peacekeeper country based on this because the sun is conjunct Saturn, so that's very much an authoritative leadership kind of placement or conjunction. But they're also conjunct with the midheaven, so that's how they'd be seen in the world. They'd be seen as a leader. Um, but the way they would do that is in through a Libra way, since the sun, well, and Mercury, but also midheaven and Saturn. Specifically, midheaven, Saturn, and Sun are all conjunct in Libra. So they'd lead the world through Libra type of activities. So they would lead the world through like peacekeeping. And again, that sounds kind of weird since we're talking about Russia, but that's what I see there. Or it would lead the world through, like, not through direct control and conflict, like we'd see if this was an Aries, but through maybe covert means, so manipulation, or, and if it's a country we're talking about, it could be economic manipulation or diplomacy. Diplomacy would be a big thing, like very much involved in different relations around the world, and diplomatic relationships and different ways of either peacekeeping or just working for its own interests indirectly, like not militarily. There's not a whole lot of fire in this chart. There's well, I guess Mars is in fire, so that would be very militaristic. Okay, there is some fire. I take that back. But as for the midheaven Sun and Saturn, that's the main thing here, and that to me would say that its main what's the word? The country's main method of exerting control or dominance would be through indirect means and not military. Like, yes, military could be a big part of it, but the main thing would be, again, diplomatic manipulation or economic manipulation. Libra is very covert. It's secretive. It leads by not leading in a way. It leads by letting other people lead or manipulating or, again, it could be peacemaking, but it could also just be manipulating for its own gain or a little bit of both. Yeah, and then with the Saturn influence and Mercury in the 10th house, it would be seen as kind of a stoic country. So the people, whether we're talking about the people or the government, well, especially the government since Saturn's here and all that, but the government especially would be seen as very stoic and maybe kind of secretive. But the people too would be kind of somber or stoic. There's a strong national pride though with Mars in Leo, and I do see some militaristic influence with the Mars in Leo, because Mars, I guess if we're talking about countries, since we are, Mars would be kind of like the military, and Mars isn't in domicile in Leo, but it's a very strong sign for Mars. So it would have a strong military, I think, in general, and strong national pride. Yeah, and Mars is in the 8th house too, so especially defensively, very strong. Yeah, so maybe more militaristic on the defense, and when it comes to offense, it would rely more on those covert methods of manipulation and stuff like that. And then again, I kind of touched on this, but the ascendant is 29 degrees Scorpio, so that's like, again, if I was the astrologer, I would not start the country at this time or this date, because like ascendant is at the last degree of Scorpio, and that does have a lot of potential for being a strong placement, but mostly it's like it doesn't get much more tumultuous than that, more volatile, destructive, chaotic. There'd be huge transformations, because the last degree of any water sign is sort of an ending, and it's very karmic, and it's very unstable, and there can be benefits to that, and that we need that in life and stuff like that. But as for for putting the identity of a country there, yeah, just very tumultuous, very difficult, very challenging. So there'd be a lot of huge transformations in this country, like whether it's the demographics of the people or whether it's the governmental system. huge changes and sudden shifts in that. Very destructive again. Um, yeah, I don't see. Oh, I do want to say this kind of brings me to, like, I was just thinking, like, what could some of the benefits of that be? Again, for a country, it'd be mostly negative, I would say. You don't want your country to be, focused on huge transformations and shifts and, being volatile and tumultuous. You'd hopefully want a little bit of consistency. Like, it is good to have growth and shifts in that sense, but to be so shifting so dramatically is probably not beneficial for a country. But one benefit would be there would be like a spiritual focus or a metaphysical focus, I guess. Um, Russia definitely hasn't been the most religious country on earth, but I would say it's more metaphysical than religious, though. Religion would be more like maybe Sagittarius or Capricorn, and this chart doesn't have a lot of planets there. But at the last degree of Scorpio, it'd be more like the kind of spirituality you experience after a crisis or after or through extreme poverty or starvation. Like, is it worth it? Probably not, but it would give you this sense of like humility and, connection to spirituality or something esoteric and there's a lot of secrecy going on. The last degree of Scorpio would be kind of secret um, and in general, this chart is very airy and watery. So there'd be a lot of like mysticism or um, maybe brainwashing or different kind of ideological battles or different kinds of ideas and beliefs clashing and mixing. More so, like there's more of a non-physical focus than a physical focus, if that makes sense. So, like, I don't see materialism being strong here at all. There's actually no Earth planets whatsoever. Materialism might benefit this country because the North Node is in Virgo, but with the South Node in Pisces, the Ascendant at the last degree of Scorpio, and then the general air and water focus, it's very non-physical. So again, focusing on diplomacy or maybe economic manipulation, maybe mind control or brainwashing or mysticism, um, spirituality. Again, probably more spirituality than religion. It's just getting very weird and psychological in a lot of different aspects of society, if that makes sense. Um, Also, Neptune's in Aquarius, and this might sound technically wrong, but I wasn't satisfied with the outer planets not having assigned signs of exaltation, so I created my own, and for my own system, Neptune's exalted in Aquarius, and I could explain that in another video, and I also believe Pluto's in domicile in Aries as well as Scorpio. So Neptune, at least in my belief, Neptune is exalted in Aquarius, and Pluto is in domicile in Aries. So going back to all that mysticism and all that stuff I was just talking about, again, in my opinion, Neptune is exalted in Aquarius, so there would be a strong, again, not religion, but there'd be a strong idea of psychology or manipulation or mysticism. I'm forgetting the word now, but mysticism or stuff like that, or maybe economics or psychology, maybe mass psychology, or understanding the world, how the world works, either metaphysically or psychologically, stuff like that. It'd be very big picture with Neptune there. So that's a strength, I guess. Like, again, it's kind of a weird strength for a country. I don't know if that would be the first thing I would think of. Like, this country really seems like its whole economy would be flawed. Like, there's no Earth planets. Venus and Jupiter in detriment. So the economy is totally kind of fucked, in my opinion. But this country would thrive at brainwashing and asserting control indirectly and being secretive, stuff like that. It's got the psychological and the metaphysical stuff down. And the national pride is nice with Mars and Leo. I like that for a country. See, Pluto and Aries. So Pluto, that has a lot of pros and cons. Like, Pluto in a fire sign is nice because you would have that pride and that that fire fueling the country, like strong hearts and wills, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But also Pluto so it's kind of reinforcing the strong national pride with Mars and Leo, since they trine each other, and Mars and Pluto are kind of similar in some ways. There would be that pride and that fire and that loyalty to the country, I guess, that a lot of Russians might have historically. But at the same time, Pluto is also reinforcing that theme in this chart of destruction and transformation, and that's kind of what that Pluto is about. And putting it in a sign of domicile is good because it's strong, but it's also bad because it's strong, if that makes sense. Like, you don't always want a super active Pluto in a chart such as this, like for a country, because again, you're igniting all these more challenging themes of intense transformation and radical change, and tumultuousness or volatility. Yeah, so that's definitely another theme. Like, messed up economy, very volatile, but also a huge focus on metaphysics and psychology and diplomacy, stuff like that. Okay, what else? And really the only planets that aren't in domicile or detriment or exaltation or fall are Uranus, Mars, and Mercury. Yeah, so that's just interesting for a chart. There's so many, that's another theme, I guess. So for a person, if a person has a lot of planets in domicile or exaltation, it makes them very popular and like well received and easily understood. If they have a lot of planets in detriment or fall, it makes them more of an outsider or an outcast, and that could be attractive too to people. Like, you could be attractive or well received because you're like against the grain or like edgy or whatever. But it's just these two types of personalities, I guess. And when you have a person, or in this case a country, with both of those, you'd have both in the same person. That's very possible too. So Russia as a country would be like an insider and an outsider, which actually makes a lot of sense. It is a world leader, and it is recognized as being one of the, historically it's been a superpower, or it's at least been a major player in key events and stuff like that. So it's kind of part of the club in a way. But at the same time, it's always like on the outside in a way. It's misunderstood, or maybe even antagonized from time to time by these other countries. So that makes a lot of sense to me, that it would be sort of popular but unpopular at the same time, if you want to put it that way, or well received but also maybe not so well received at different times in history, or maybe even both at the same time. There's a high potential for misunderstanding between Russia and other countries, or between the Russian government and the Russian people, because again, you've got all that secrecy and indirect things going on. Air and water are kind of the more out of place, or misunderstood elements, I'd say, because again, it's stuff you don't see. It's all non-physical. It depending on how you look at it, it changes whatever it is, because we're getting more metaphysical here. It's not as literal. So yeah, and it gets hard to even talk about, like, because for a very airy and watery person or country, depending on your beliefs, you're going to experience it very differently. Rather than if it was fire or earth, it would be very literal, and so it'd be easy for everyone to agree, like, oh yeah, this is what this is like. If that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but for this chart, because it's so because it's so airy and watery, people would experience it in different ways. People would understand it differently. Some people might be really for it. Some people might be really against it. And you could say that's true with all countries, but specifically for this one, like, especially more so than other countries. Yeah. Let me see. Let me just make sure. I think the lighting is kind of off, but that's okay. I'm too far into it to stop now. Okay, what else? I pretty much covered most of it. South Node in Pisces. So again, that emphasis on metaphysics, or weird belief systems. I don't see it so much as religion, but the non-physical focus. What would benefit the country is going towards the North Node in Virgo. So, trying to find that stability and that groundedness, that earthiness. Like, if it was a person, I would say you should date an earth sign, but because it's a country, I don't know how that would work. Like, just, I don't think it would work. Like, I think it's kind of almost doomed to have a like a struggling economy and a difficult relationship with the physical world in general, I guess, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's pretty much what I see for just the country as a whole, as its own entity. As for the 1991 chart, this is a little better, but again, I just don't think an astrologer was there to help out with this chart. Because again, you've got Venus and Jupiter in fall. Again, there are a lot of patterns though. So again, you have Pluto and domicile in Scorpio. I actually consider Uranus in domicile in Capricorns. That might get kind of controversial with anyone who knows astrology, but I can explain it in a different video. It actually makes sense. But anyway, as for the other stuff, you got Mars in a fire sign again, so a lot of things in common. Sorry. Moon in Aquarius. Oh, in this other chart too, I forgot to mention Moon is in domicile in Cancer, so that kind of just reinforces the wateriness of it, the non-physical aspects. I think the Moon would more represent the people of the country rather than the government. Same with Uranus, and because both are in Cancer, the people would be sort of sensitive and kind of old souls. They'd be more maybe mystical or intuitive or superstitious maybe. They'd be more conservative, if that makes sense. So, more traditional, more clinging on to old traditions, and what else? Maybe historically they'd be maybe clinging more onto the farming lifestyle, or making things themselves, so they'd be slow to industrialize, stuff like that, with the Cancer emphasis. Oh, another thing too is that the sun Saturn midheaven conjunction is square to the moon. So again, I would not start a country with the sun square the moon like this on a third quarter moon. The third quarter moon is very philosophical and spiritual, so that kind of reinforces that archetype. It's also volatile, and it's a time of change. So that's just another thing that reinforces those archetypes. So I guess I'd say, just list them off as being huge metaphysical or non-physical focus, very volatile, misunderstood, and also poor economy. That sounds kind of judgmental, but that's what I see. And then also misunderstood. So again, the government might misunderstand the people might misunderstand the government. Also, Russia might be misunderstood among the other countries, because when you have sun and moon square, there's this friction there, or this dynamism within the personality, or contrast. And so, especially when you've got Libra with the sun and midheaven. So, because Libra is a very misunderstood sign. So people might misunderstand that, but even if they do understand that aspect of it, they might then misunderstand the moon, because it's in such a different sign to the Libra sun. So anyway, so what that translates to is misunderstandings with the government, secrecy. Cancer and Libra both do things very indirectly. So yeah, very indirect, very secretive, manipulative. And again, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the government or, diplomatic relations between the government and other countries, or between the government and the people. Or maybe even the people themselves might have a more non-physical focus, or might be more socially cunning or tactful, rather than being just overt and using directness or direct aggression. They might use more covert means of communication, or just approach to life, something like that. Okay. With the 1991 chart, we've got a little bit more yang energy, I guess, just because the moon is in Aquarius. Excuse me. This isn't as interesting because I don't have the ascendant. There are some themes though. So you've got moon is in Aquarius here, sun is in Libra in the other chart, so there's an air focus again. South node is in Cancer with north node in Capricorn, so that's kind of similar to the south node in Pisces, north node in Virgo here in the other chart. Mars is in a fire sign. Mercury's retrograde here, so I really wouldn't choose that for a country because again, you have misunderstandings between the government and the people, or the government and other governments. This country would have like a unique way of communication, or a unique media, like a weird media, a more traditional media, or a more traditional form of diplomacy, one that's done. It's traditional, but it's also like indirect or out of the ordinary, I guess. It's traditional yet unique and unusual. The media could also be used as sort of a weapon with Mercury conjunct Mars here, or diplomacy could be used as a weapon. So again, you've got that theme of um, using information to be manipulative, or using diplomacy to be manipulative. Um, you've got Sears conjunct the Sun, and I think that's harmonious. I don't know much about Sears, but I think it has to do with food and abundance. So having that conjunct the Sun might help a little bit. Again, though, you don't have a lot of Earth planets. You do have Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn, and Jupiter in Virgo. Jupiter and Virgo could work either way because although Jupiter's in detriment in Virgo, Jupiter could still help the area that it's in. So if it's in Virgo, which is the sign of like money and productivity, Jupiter could help with that. So I would speculate that since 1991, the economy could actually improve a little bit, which is true. It has improved a lot since then. Saturn's in domicile, which is kind of nice. Mercury's in detriment, though. It's kind of a hit and miss chart. Same with the other one. It's like, especially this one, the original 862 chart or whatever year it is. Yeah. It's just a hit and miss chart. There's definitely some strengths, but as a whole, I probably would have avoided it for a country. However, it does make for a really interesting country. Like, if I was starting a country, I would probably focus more on the fire and earth aspects of a chart. But this is so earthy an area, it just creates this sort of unusual or, unorthodox personality for the country. So while I don't think it's a very functional chart, it is very interesting to analyze and speculate about. So anyway, I think I've rambled enough about this. Hopefully you found that interesting. And if you want me to do any other charts at all or have any other suggestions, please let me know. And otherwise, thanks for watching. I'll see you later.